Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Elizabeth Holmes. Voters in North Carolina will have a chance to change the state constitution in November. In addition to electing public officials, they'll also weigh in on at least 2 constitutional amendments focused on taxes. Republican lawmakers pushed the proposals through the legislature on Wednesday, hoping to cap the state's income tax rate at 3.5% and to restrict how quickly local governments can increase property taxes. WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran followed the debate, and he joins us now. A quick note, we are recording this on Friday, May 22nd. So if you're listening to this in the podcast app, be sure to check out the WRAL YouTube channel and our website for the latest updates. All right, here's my conversation with Will. Will, it's been a busy week at the legislature.
Just a bit, yeah.
Just a bit. Not a big deal. We want to talk about 2 high-profile bills this week: the proposed constitutional amendment on income taxes and then property taxes. So let's start with income taxes. What is that all about?
This would cap the state's income tax rate at 3.5%. So it wouldn't be lowering the rate, but it would say that in the future, the legislature is never allowed to raise it above 3.5%.
Mm-hmm. And then for property taxes?
The property tax one is much more vague. Lawmakers actually haven't given any details of that, and they've said that they won't give any details of it unless people approve it first. And so that's raised some suspicions among particularly opponents of the idea, who say, wait a second, how are we supposed to decide if we want to vote on this or not if you won't even tell us what you're going to do with this? But Republicans say, look, it's complicated. We're going to need a long time to figure out how to actually do it. But we think that the people of the state should give us the directive to go ahead and do something. And then if they do, then we will take that momentum to do something.
Interesting. I know that the Capitol team has done some stories, I think about Caroline Jaffa, for example, doing stories on property taxes and people being upset about them constantly going up.
Yes. Oh, I mean, especially here in the Triangle where, property values have risen so much just in the last few years. There have been cases where the county, or different counties have either, kept the rate the same or even lowered it, but still your bill goes up. Because when they do the reappraisals, what used to be a $300,000 house on paper turns into a $600,000 or $700,000 house. So, even if the property tax rate goes down a little bit, if your house doubles in value, you're going to be paying more in taxes. And, that's a big problem, especially for people on fixed incomes, people who are disabled, on Social Security, things like that. So, yeah, it's definitely an issue that people talk about.
So why is this happening now, of all times? Obviously, this is kind of also in the middle of budget negotiations.
Yes. So these 2 amendments specifically are actually part of the budget negotiation. For people who haven't been following these podcasts, we are basically a year late on our state budget, and lawmakers just this month say that they have finally reached a deal to get it done. But part of that deal is putting these 2 amendments on the ballot. So now that has been accomplished, they found the votes to get it done. It was a complete party line vote in the Senate, and there are actually 2 ex-Democrats in the House who lost their political primaries in March, quit the Democratic Party in protest, and then helped Republicans pass this in the House. And so it's on the ballot now, and that should help the budget negotiations move forward.
Right. And there's also, as with everything, some politics to this as well.
Of course. Everyone agrees that this is probably not going to be a great year for Republicans. Just historically speaking, whichever party controls the White House always does poorly in midterms. And if you look at President Trump's polling right now, it's also historically bad. And so Republicans are a little bit worried about what happens in November. And so, it's reasonable to think that, hey, if you put some amendments on the ballot to lower your taxes, then that could, gin up support among Republican voters, people who might normally, not necessarily vote Democratic, but just stay home and not come out and vote at all. Mm-hmm. They might say, oh, okay, well, even though I'm not too excited about voting for any of the actual politicians on the ballot this year, because I'm not too happy about things happening in D.C., I do like the idea of lowering taxes, and so I'm going to come out and vote. And, the hope would be that when they're out there at the polls, they also vote for Republican candidates.
Interesting, especially because cost of living is such a hot topic right now.
Yes, and one that Democrats think that they have the winning message on.
Yeah.
They've really been hammering on inflation.
Exactly. So now that these are passed, what happens next?
Well, it goes to the ballot. And so people need to start researching this, figuring out whether they support it, whether they oppose it, because the governor can't veto these in North Carolina. That's actually, well, because they have to pass with supermajority support anyways in the first place, so vetoing it would be kind of pointless. But either way, he's banned from vetoing it. And so this just now heads straight to the ballot. People will vote on these in November, pending any sort of lawsuits. We have seen some lawsuits in the past that have attempted to stop amendments from going onto the ballot or to change the way that they're worded on the ballot. Obviously, it's still a little too soon to know if that'll happen or not. But, as of right now, at least, they're going to be on the ballot. And people need to start looking it up, doing their homework.
And turning to WRAL to do that.
Exactly.
Republicans had, at one point, planned to cut the income tax rate to below 3.5%. So why do they think that this needs to be in the Constitution to really solidify things?
Yeah, so that is part of the budget deal, is that, regardless of what voters do in November, the income tax rate should drop to technically 3.49% starting in 2027. But that's just a state law. If you put it in the Constitution, it becomes much harder to undo. You can undo a state law with just a simple majority, 50% of the vote in the legislature. But if it's a constitutional amendment, you need 60% of the vote in the legislature plus 50% of all of the voters in the state. So by putting it in the amendment, you really just protect your strategy and what you want to do, which is what they want to do here.
Right. Wasn't there already an effort to cap income taxes, and didn't it fail prior to this?
Yes. So there's been a few. So let's back up a few years here. It used to be that the state's income tax rate was capped at 10%. We didn't actually have 10% tax rates, but if the legislature had wanted to, they could have raised them as high as 10%. Then in 2018, the last time that there was a blue wave kind of Democratic midterm year, they put a very similar amendment on the ballot, lowering that cap from 10 to 7%. Then last year, Senate Republicans tried to lower it again to 5%, but that idea actually faced a lot of pushback from their fellow Republicans, and the House shot it down. They said, no, we're not going to do this. We've many of the same arguments that we're hearing now, that it's just a little too aggressive. It doesn't give the state a lot of wiggle room in case of, a recession in the future or if our population growth ever slows down. And there's just a little too much hesitancy to go with that 5% limit back in 2024. But this year we've got a new Speaker of the House. They needed to get this budget deal done, and this was part of the deal.
Was there ever a threat that taxes would be raised in the first place? And is it not possible to try to keep taxes low without actually putting it into the Constitution like this, the state Constitution?
Yeah, well, like I said, you can absolutely write it into law, say that we want taxes to be X, Y, and Z rate. The problem is just if Democrats were ever to take control of the legislature in the future, they could change that. And Democrats have suggested that they think the corporate income tax should be a little bit higher. It's scheduled to go to 0% by 2030, which they've said is wrong, that they intend to undo once they take power. And they've also said that, taxes specifically for the wealthy should be higher. Actually, Democrats tried proposing an amendment to this amendment saying, okay, why don't we say we'll work with you Republicans and let's say we'll keep it capped at 3.5% for the bottom 99% of earners, but the top 1% are not subject to that cap, and we can raise the tax rate to whatever, I guess it would be 7% on the top 1%. And Republicans said no, shot that down. So Democrats, have indicated that, they may raise taxes on certain people or corporations if they take back control. And that's something that, Republicans say is why this is needed to prevent that from happening.
Interesting. And you have kind of already brought this up, but there's obviously been some concern about what this cap would do. As you mentioned, if there's not as many people moving to the state, if we ever see a slowdown in growth, which seems like it might not happen. I feel like North Carolina's just growing at a crazy rate at this point. So why do people see this as a problem, essentially?
Yeah. What Republicans say is that, look, our strategies have worked. We took over in 2011, almost immediately started cutting taxes, and ever since then, even though the state's tax rate has gone down and down and down and down basically every year, our revenues have gone up. We've had more and more money to spend. The state's budget has basically doubled in the last decade or so. And that's because we have more people living here, and those people are making more money. And so as your population grows and wages increase, then even if you do cut taxes, you find money in other ways. And, they've expanded the sales tax base, applying, more things now, get taxed for sales taxes, things like that. So we have seen our revenues go up even despite these income tax cuts. The counter argument to that is, well, yes, we've had this just insane growth. And if that ever slows down, then we're going to hit these, big revenue drops in North Carolina. And we're not like the federal government here in North Carolina. The feds can do deficit spending, go into debt. That is illegal in North Carolina. So if your revenues drop and you aren't able to find new forms of revenue, like by raising taxes, then you have no choice but to cut spending. You can't do deficit spending and say, we'll just pay for this later like the feds do. You have to make specific cuts. And so that's really been the fear of a lot of people, especially since education is the majority of spending in the budget. So, if you're having to cut a lot of money, potentially hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars from the state in the future, you're absolutely going to have to look at education, at least as an option to cut.
So what happens if people vote yes to this in November?
Well, nothing happens immediately because, again, the state income tax we're expecting should be dropping to 3.49% anyways. So if people vote for this 3.5% rate in the Constitution, that's not going to change anything. It's not going to do anything immediately. It's more the long term is, okay, what happens if we do hit a recession? Well, you're not going to be able to raise taxes up to cover those costs. Or what happens if Democrats take control and they want to charge higher taxes to the wealthy? They're not going to be able to do that. So nothing immediately will change regardless of what happens with this amendment. It's just what happens in the future down the road.
Interesting.
So there's actually a third one that's going to be on the ballot, we know, for voter ID. Now, people may remember back in 2018 that they voted to put voter ID into the state constitution. That's correct. But that amendment was only for people who vote in person. And it's been state law that you also have to provide a copy of your ID when you vote by mail, but that's not part of the state constitution itself. So there is an amendment to do that this year. And there's a bunch of other amendments that have been floated that Republicans are talking about. They just haven't pushed as fast as these tax ones. We've got some amendments like to reorganize how we handle the State Board of Education, which is the group that picks textbooks and does other school policies. They want to make those offices elected. There's a few others on different pieces of state government. One to respect the right to farm, another to solidify our right to work laws, which are kind of anti-organized labor rules that are already state law, but kind of similar with the taxes. If you put it into the Constitution, it becomes harder for Democrats to get rid of in the future if they ever take control. So that's definitely on our radar. We've been watching all of those. Quite a bit of action down in the legislature. They're going to be here at least through June. Who knows how much longer? So they got plenty of time to do more if they want to.
And folks have plenty of time until November to read up on all of
Exactly.
this so that they can make an informed decision.
There you go.
And we hope that WRAL is part of that.
Yes, we do.
For all of Will's reporting on the proposed constitutional amendments, visit the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. And thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.